In this video, I want to cover why having approval from others or validation, or just being in your comfort zone overall is a bad thing, and why you have to avoid it, and why, in reality, you may think that you're comfortable right now, but you probably aren't. So let's take a look. So let me start by saying that most communication fears, or most sales fears, have to do with being judged or not being validated. That is, you fear that the person is going to judge you, that they're not going to be happy, that they're going to insult you, or that there's going to be some kind of confrontation. And that makes you uncomfortable. Usually, that's the root cause of most problems in terms of sales, communication, presenting in public, negotiating, pitching, tension, frame battles, and any type of persuasion at the end of the day. But here's the key. Not only is that validation and approval the wrong result, but the whole model itself is wrong as well. So let me explain why. So first of all, there's an assumption that if you say the right thing or you please the person, you're going to get a good result. At the end of the day, that's a false assumption, and that's just a pleasantry. Just because you obtain validation from somebody, it doesn't mean that they're going to buy anything, it doesn't mean that they're going to be your friend, and it doesn't mean that they're going to have any positive reaction from anything. In other words, they don't have to like you, they just have to buy from you. Or if you're communicating instead of selling, they don't have to like you, they just have to get your message. So the two things are not related. And on top of that, there's a paradox here, which is, as with many dynamics in life, the more that you try to do something to please somebody, the more likely that they are to not be pleased by you. This has to do with the amount of tension that is created in social terms. That is, when you have a high status person, they're going to make a low status person nervous. That is, if you have a prospect or a client who is very important, you are more likely to try and prove yourself to them to get them to like you. But in reality, a high status person is much more likely to respect another high status person. That is, when someone of high status enters the room, they're much more likely to like the people that are not affected by them. So if you have high status, you are not affected by somebody else that has high status, because up to a degree, you don't care what they think. You're just following your path. Maybe they like you, maybe they don't, but you don't care about it. On the other hand, if you are trying to prove yourself, you are going to do everything possible to get the person to like you. You're going to try and prove yourself, justify yourself, tell them why you're great, and it's precisely the type of behavior that people can just sense a mile away and they don't enjoy it. So paradoxically, by you trying to seek validation from a prospect or a client, you are not going to have it. On the other hand, by you just stating your value proposition, not proving yourself, and you taking the risk of them not liking you, they are much more likely to actually like you. But at the end of the day, that's just a result. As I mentioned, the whole model is wrong, because even if you get someone to like you, or even if you get someone to respect you, that doesn't mean that they're going to buy from you. And this brings me to my next point, which is that comfort, approval, and validation in many cases are just illusions. That is, when someone tells you that you really enjoy your value proposition or your product or whatever it is, that doesn't even mean that they're being truthful to begin with. And even if they're being truthful, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, we are so happy when we get approval or validation, or when we feel comfortable in certain situations, that we don't even stop to think that we don't have that validation or that comfort to begin with. And that's why I mentioned in the beginning that you're probably not comfortable right now, because being comfortable or not is just an illusion. It doesn't matter. And seeking validation from someone or not is just an illusion as well. In other words, your goal should not be to go from zero validation to full validation. Your goal should be to live in zero validation and be fine with it. Likewise, your goal should not be to move from uncomfortable to comfortable. Your goal should be to live in the uncomfortable zone and to be fine with it. So you may ask a very interesting question, which is that if we don't need to move towards validation or comfort or approval, where does that leave us? And the answer is indifference. That is, you are just pitching your value proposition and trying to say things that are true to your prospect or to anybody else. If they like you, that's fine. If they don't like you, you still follow the process. There's a concept in the corporate world which is called asset management. For example, in the financial world, asset management in terms of investments, in the IT world, asset management in terms of IT systems, and so on. But the logic behind it is very simple. You just inventory your assets, you take care of them, you see whether their value is growing or not, and when they're done, you retire them. You literally manage them like objective assets. They are tangible, they have a value, and it can increase or decrease. And the way that you have to see yourself is just as another asset. You don't need somebody to like your pitch, you don't need someone to dislike your pitch, you are completely indifferent to it. You are just another asset, and you may raise in value, you may lower in value, but you are just managed in a tangible manner. That is, you just go through the process. Sometimes you are going to get results, and sometimes you are not, but life goes on. One technique that you can even use to become better is to embrace extreme discomfort. So to give you an example, in my everyday work life, when I'm doing sales or any type of persuasion, I have a very lofty office with my MacBook, my Mac actually, and fancy pen, fancy notebook. But sometimes I don't like that comfort. So what I do is I just run away from the office, I take a cheap phone, a cheap pen, and a cheap piece of paper, and I just try and sell or persuade using myself. In other words, I actively distance myself from the comfort just to not have that effect that it has on me. That is, it makes me lazy, it makes me entitled, and sometimes I just need to push the reset button and show that I don't need that validation or that comfort. And this is good because in any area of life, once you go through an extreme experience, then you're more prepared for everyday life. For example, if you're trying to run a little bit better, go run a marathon, because then by comparison, your everyday runs are going to seem so much easier by comparison. Likewise, if you throw yourself into extreme discomfort, and in this case, if you embrace extreme discomfort and you learn how to sell without your creature comforts, without validation, without approval, yes, it is going to be a little bit extreme, but when you go back to everyday life, how easy is it going to be to sell without a little bit of approval or a little bit of comfort? It's going to be so much easier in comparison. So to summarize everything that we've stated so far, first of all, you don't need approval, validation, or comfort, because even if you have them, that doesn't mean that you are going to get results. It doesn't mean that someone is going to buy or that they received your message. And here's the thing, on top of that, many times, even when you think that you have those elements, it may be just an illusion. So you may think that you're comfortable in a given situation, but in reality, you're uncomfortable. You just didn't realize it. Or you may think that you have a prospect's validation, but in reality, you don't have it. You just think that you have it. So in other words, validation, comfort, and approval are not needed, and even if you actually have them, that doesn't mean that you have them in reality. They may be an illusion. Then, if we don't need validation or comfort or approval, where does that leave us? Indifference. That is, just because you have comfort or validation, it's not going to make your sale necessarily better, but it doesn't mean that the lack of it is going to make it worse. It's literally indifferent. One thing is not related to the other, so just follow the process and be indifferent to these elements. And finally, a great way to move away from comfort and validation is to go the opposite way. Live in extreme discomfort and with extreme lack of validation. Try to pitch without any fancy creature comforts or without the person even liking you in the first place. And then you're going to be much more prepared to live without these things in your sales process in everyday life. If you've enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing. And remember to check out our channel for more sales, negotiation, and communication techniques at the end of the day.